Good afternoon and welcome to the April 15th meeting of Lextran's Finance Committee. My name is Fred Combs, and I'll pass the meeting over to the Chair of the Finance Committee, Mr. George Ward.
Thank you, sir. I'll call the meeting to order, and our first order of business is the approval of the minutes from the September 25th, 2023 Finance Committee meeting. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
I guess I'll second it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. So the purpose of the meeting today, the primary purpose, is to go through the fiscal year 2024 budget. And are you taking it, Nikki?
We're going
Fred?
to go back and forth here a little bit.
Okay. Is this similar to what your presentation will be to City Council?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Well, thank you for joining us today. This is our proposed FY 2025 operating budget and capital plan. Our mission statement: we serve people in our community with mobility solutions. And before we jump into the budget, some highlights from this fiscal year to date so far, and then some things we're looking ahead to in next fiscal year. We celebrated our 50th anniversary. That included a Gray Line Station block party, an event at the Clare Story, a mayoral proclamation. We also had a museum, and we gave tours of the facility to members of the public. All in all, I think it was a really fun celebration for staff, for the public, and hopefully for the community as well. Our fixed route service is on pace for about 3.8 million trips this fiscal year. That's an increase of about 10%. We received 21 new vehicles as part of our fleet replacement program. 10 of those are fixed route, 9 in paratransit, and 2 non-revenue vehicles. For paratransit specifically, we launched a new rider guide and conducted listening sessions to get feedback from the community. We plan on carrying that forward into the next fiscal year as well. We have made strides on the capital projects, including the transit center renovation, compressed natural gas fueling infrastructure, and an intelligent transportation systems project. That's our CAD-ADL or our VAIL system. We have completed the on-route infrastructure improvement at 13 bus stops under the RAMP program. That includes 3 new shelter installations, 6 replacements, and 4 locations that received improvements such as benches, sidewalk connections, and ADA improvements. Also, some work to be done as we conclude fiscal year 2024, including our contract negotiations that we will kick off on May the 20th, and our paratransit services contract that is currently in an open procurement, and we hope to bring a recommendation before the board at our regular board meeting next week. So looking ahead into next year, we're planning on launching a new strategic planning effort. I think the first step in that is to get the board together to sort of scope out some of the next steps in a strategic plan. We're going to continue the focus on our paratransit improvements. We know that we need fleet replacement in paratransit. We do have some money available for that. And again, the new services contract that should be before the board next week. We have a focus in this budget on employee development that includes the implementation of a top performance program that we've already got in the works, but we'll carry that forward in the next fiscal year, as well as expanded training opportunities for all staff under a contract that we recently signed with New Horizons. Our aim in the next year is to complete some of the major capital projects that we've been working on, including the transit center. I do have some good news back from the state on the exterior portion of that project. Hopefully we'll get both of those, if not nearing complete by the end of next fiscal year. And you see the renderings in this PowerPoint of what we hope the interior space will look like for customers on the top and then for employees on the bottom. Our CNG facilities program, we have received delivery of the equipment that will be installed here on site for fueling of CNG vehicles. We hope to kick off the construction process on that within the next month or so.
Where does that happen now?
Sorry?
Where does that happen now?
It's here.
It's here.
Yeah,
now?
it's here. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're essentially doubling the amount that we can fuel here. The next phase in our RAMP program, that's Rider Amenities at Many Places, is going to be the Solar Light Grant Award that we received a year or so ago. And we will have some additional funding available for shelter replacements as needed. We're going to continue to pursue grant opportunities. We do have one already submitted in partnership with the city. That was the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. That will be to fund the canopy, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. We hope to hear about that award sometime later in the fall. In the works currently, we have a bus and bus facilities low and no emissions grant application that we're putting together that's due later this week. Hopefully we'll hear about that at some point in the next fiscal year. And we expect a congestion mitigation air quality opportunity to become available at some point along the way as well. Lastly on here, I have requested $75,000 in this budget to do a microtransit study. That's a feasibility study to understand what a microtransit program would look like in the city, and then the sustainable funding sources that would use to fund it. I think as we go through this budget, it's clear the talking points that we've had in microtransit, not only to the board, but also the city council and other community groups that are interested in a microtransit program. Lextran is interested in working with it, taking whatever role the community would like to see us take, be that manage it or contribute some sort of expertise to a microtransit study or program. However, we need help funding it. We don't have the funds to sustain a long-term microtransit program as we sit today.
So is Lextran paying for this study?
I've requested $75,000 in this budget for the study. We do hope that there's a possibility that the MPO could help, or that the city could help. So as we jump into the budget itself, I've got the first two slides here are the pie charts to give the committee a sense of scale and proportion of the different categories within the budget. So on our revenue side, our property tax and our federal funding account for roughly 80% of our revenues. The remainder of the UK partnership, state funding, passenger fares, advertising revenue, miscellaneous revenue account for a much less piece of the pie, so to speak. And then on the expenses side, wages and fringes is 55% of our expenses. Paratransit expenses are 23%. So those two components are a considerable amount of our expenses. Fuel and oil at 6%, professional services 5%, materials and supplies at 4%, and then property liability and insurance at 3%, and then a smaller piece between utilities and phone, miscellaneous, media advertising, professional development, employee engagement, and leases, all at or below 1% each. So we can get through the operating budget line by line, and this is where I think Nikki can kind of jump in and help us walk through each line of this budget. Property tax revenue to start off, we have budgeted $24 million. You want to take us through our assumptions that we made to get there?
Sure.
Can I ask a question first?
Sure.
Have you written a list of anticipated questions you're going to get at the city council?
Not a full list, but I've thought a lot about it, yes. And I think microtransit has been one of the top ones. And paratransit, I think those are the two that I've heard most feedback from council on.
Do you think he should answer lots of those in his presentation to head it off at the pass, or should he wait for the questions?
I think you should address it.
I'd just recommend, sit down with Emily
Yeah.
and come up with a pretty good list of what you think you might get asked.
When's your council presentation?
May the 14th.
And Nikki, what was some of the stuff from last? Were you there last year?
I was watching last year.
You're watching it.
I think I
Do you
had
remember the
COVID
question?
last year.
What
The questions revolved around a certain
Bus stop.
a certain
Okay.
illegal activity at a certain bus stop.
All right, so that was the bulk of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is that any better?
We've not heard quite as much activity from that location
That was over
so far.
I guess 2 weeks ago, and there were only a couple of people.
Now the weather's starting to turn, so that might pick up again as we move into the summer.
So make sure you have a good answer for that too.
Yes.
And I don't know if you can tie ramp into that. I don't know.
But your point is we've never had such a focus and a lens on transportation by the community as we have this year, given Bill's efforts around transportation. So it is going to have to be a very thought out, well, good presentation.
It's 75,000 per study is pretty much a goodwill effort.
To understand exactly what it is that the community needs. I mean, that's the biggest, I think the next step is we don't know where the zone should be or the real outline of what those zones should look like, how the pickups and drop-offs in microtransit can work several different ways. We've not engaged to understand what that looks like, even to go as far as how much time do you have to give to book a trip? It varies in different cities, and each decision like that you make really impacts the long-term cost of a program. So without putting some definition around those questions, we really just don't know how much a program will cost.
So the study will make a recommendation on what the service should be and how much it will cost?
Yes, try to get the community involved to say, this is what the community wants, and this is how we can design a program around that. If you carry that forward, this is how much money you should look at to pay for the program.
And at one time, council was considering a $2 million allocation towards paratransit or microtransit.
Yes.
I think that's been paused.
The initial ask was $2 million, and then it was stepped back to ask for $400,000 to match a possible grant, and that didn't come out of committee. Part of that was, again, the sustainable funding piece, knowing that Lextran doesn't have $2 million a year for a microtransit program. And if you want to be more competitive in these kinds of grant awards, if you can show a sustainable funding source, you've got a much better shot at winning. And we just simply don't have that right now.
All right, and then what about paratransit?
Paratransit is an open procurement, so we'll have much more information around what that's going to look like moving forward.
So you're bringing that to the board
We'll be bringing that to the board next
before
next
we
week.
go to the budget meeting?
Yes.
So the board may already approve whatever recommendation comes forward, right?
And regardless of what happens with the next contract, we are working with our ATB Dev, especially in light of some recent conversations around paratransit. We've got a meeting scheduled with them tomorrow in person. Their regional vice president will be here, and representatives from EcoLane, so that's their scheduling provider, will be here. We've got a list of issues to work through. So we'll definitely be giving the board a briefing on how that goes and what are the next steps, regardless of how the procurement turns out.
Do they have a location in the event that they're selected?
Yes.
You do?
Yes, they do.
Do they have anything in writing?
To my knowledge, that it is ready to go should they win the award.
All right, sorry.
Okay. We are looking at our property tax. We went with a 3% increase. It's kind of been historical. This year was a little more than 3%, but we looked over the past few years, and so we budgeted at 3%.
Has it historically been 3?
Yes.
And that's a combination of reassessments and new?
Yes, it did go up when they did the reassessments in 2022, 2021. It had, I actually have it on here. I'll show you.
They reassess every year, like 20%.
Part of the city, yeah.
They did the, whatever that major one was in 2022, and it actually went up to 6%. But looking all the way back to 2018, it's been 3% every year.
Be interesting to see what happens when they expand the urban services boundary.
Yes.
Because there'll be more property developed.
We are engaged with the consulting firms that are working on that. So
You're saying we forecasted 3% every year, or it's actually landed?
It's actually came in at 3% every year. Except 2022, and that was 5%.
Okay.
Our federal funding.
Quick question. If it comes in at 3% every year, do we budget 100% of that 3%? Or how do we handle that?
We do budget 100% of that. If there's anything left over, it does go in. We have some in our reserves, and then it goes in our just our regular operating or mass transit account.
Okay. I do have a little concern, but it's not a major one. But you know, house prices have gone up 25% in some areas, and only God knows how far up it's still gonna go. It might go higher, I might be wrong. We may also face a bubble, only God knows. So my caution would be not to go to the entire 3%, in case we face some, something like what we faced in, back in 2007, 8, 9. We don't find ourselves in the people.
Our federal funding, this is from our 5307 funding. There was, for the fiscal year 2024, we had $786,000 left in the COVID relief money. The budget is a little higher for the FY 2024 money, but we actually received that, some of that in FY 23. And that's why those are they look a little bit different. When we did the budget in FY 24, we took a picture at that time, and then we had some of that money that we used in FY 2023 because it was for operating expenses, anything to do with operations, payroll, diesel fuel, things like that. So our federal funding will be a little bit less this year, but we do have an increase in our state funding, because anytime that our 5307 money goes up, our state funding will go up, as long as they continue to match our 5307 grants with 20%. So when they match our 5307 grants, that saves Lextran about $1.5 million in actual cash on our side, and we can use the state's cash. So we're very, very grateful for that. Our UK partnership is based on our contract. The projected is based on what service that we elected to do after the new year began. So we went with the FY 2024 budget because of what is in the contract. That could increase, it could decrease depending on what the service actually is. We talked a little bit about state funding. Passenger fares, we're looking at a 2% increase. Fred and I have taken a look at that, and we think that that's pretty fair based on what we've had. We've seen a lot, ridership has increased, of course. We've seen a lot of pass sales. So pass sales increases ridership, but not necessarily increases cash, because if you buy a 30-day pass, you can ride as many times as you want. But we are looking at 2% there. Our advertising revenue is based on a contract. Our current contract is $260,000. We do have a new RFP that we're getting ready to release. So we just based the budget on what we think that we're going to ask for. It actually may be a little bit more than this, because I think we will ask for more than $260,000 in guaranteed revenue, because we've seen in FY 2023 the actual was $355,000. And in the year before that, it was about $290,000. So
355 is what we got?
355 is what we got last year, yes.
Okay. 260 is the minimum.
Yes, correct.
And do we have any idea how much the vendor gets?
We do it 50-50. Yeah, and they guarantee us 260, and anything over that we get 50% of.
Okay.
The miscellaneous revenue, this is our fuel tax. That I know you all love to talk about fuel tax. We would get a refund of 7/9 of the fuel tax for the state. This is also a little bit of vending machine revenue that we put towards any of our employee engagement activities. And the last item, since we had 2023 on here, that was the last of the new markets tax credits, and of course that transaction ended. So we are looking at $35 million in our revenue. Any questions on revenue?
Two questions.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to do what Dr. Capo is saying is actually to budget less, so to budget 2.75 and not to budget the 3%. I believe, right? Instead of budgeting for 3% and not spending it all, we would budget for a lower forecast. And the only benefit to that is that it's more conservative. but we would have to also decrease all of our expenses, which right now,
Correct.
our expenses are more than our revenue.
Yes. We're looking at using some of our surplus.
And then,
Surplus to balance the budget,
Yes.
you all know I always have concerns with that.
yes,
It's not a good practice, I'll be honest with you, it is not a good practice. I want the best for us, and I want us to be in a stronger fiscal position. And using surplus to balance the budget is dangerous, very dangerous. The place I'm in right now, that's the practice they had in the past. And when the bottom fell, they could not control it. So the surplus should build our fund balance for rainy days, but not to balance the budget.
And
I know you do a phenomenal job, but I do have concerns with that. You're always good, but when it comes to projection, the time we live in, no one knows exactly what will happen tomorrow. And so when you use the surplus to balance the budget, that means you have a structural problem in your budget. I would rather we fix that structural problem and let surplus be a surplus.
we do have more at this time than we normally do because of some of the COVID money. So that's why in this budget we budgeted to use some of that, because normally we have a balanced budget, but we do have some of the COVID money, and some of our unknowns are very large this year. We have several open items. We have our paratransit contract, we have our contract negotiations with the union, so we have a lot of unknown right now. So that's why we went with using some of our surplus funds.
So let me ask this question, are we using the surplus on recurring expenses or just one time?
It's recurring right
It's
now.
recurring right now.
And a lot of it has to do with paratransit, but it doesn't mean that it's right. So,
It is concerning,
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, it is concerning, seriously.
and we've been talking about this for several years, that our revenue would outpace our expenses. I think we originally, do we think it was 2025? We thought it was gonna be in 2025.
2025, before the COVID money.
So we've been talking about, I guess it's 2025, I can't believe it's 2025.
I know, right?
Like in year 2025, our revenue will outpace our expenses. What are we going to do? And here we are in 2025.
Here we are.
Well, I was gonna bring up something similar to what Dr. Acapa was talking about, because it's not sustainable forever. It's sustainable for 15 years. But that's, like he says, it's not a good practice. And I'm wondering on the wages and fringes, you budget full employment?
No, I have some turnover built in for operators.
But does that include vacant positions? Or,
We do include vacant positions budgeting for maintenance, and because we have to fill the maintenance positions because there are fewer of them. Operators, we do build in some turnover, and we don't count those positions or fringe for them.
that's like almost an 18% increase, isn't it? What the 24 projected?
Some of that is
budget?
very much unknown going into negotiations,
It's not gonna be 17%.
Yeah,
and health insurance too.
let me answer this other question, Nikki. How much is our payroll contingency?
What do you say? How much is-
I'm sorry, can you ask that
Payroll
again?
contingency. I'm not sure.
Contingency for payroll,
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm sorry.
Explain what you mean, Dr. Capo.
So what I mean is, I understand you built in vacancies and everything. So do we have actual field positions for vacancies and everything at 100%? Or do we have a cushion in best practice? You need at least 3% contingency. You may end up offering more than what you budgeted, and things may happen where you may need some crucial positions, and we also have bargaining units, so things can get out of control. Do we have any cushion at all in the payroll? That's why it's a payroll contingency.
Yes, we took all of that into account when we were building the budget.
So what's the percentage? You don't know?
We're in open contract negotiations, so we built in a percentage, but
So you can share that with us? I'm not trying to make it difficult for you, but I also want to make sure we make a tough decision today, then turning around and making a bigger decision a year or two from today.
right, we understand. We don't like budgeting to deficit either, but we do have some of the COVID money that we need to use. That's or not COVID money, I'm sorry, the mass transit funds, where it allowed us to build up some of our mass transit funds. So there were several things that we budgeted for, and like Fred said, there are a lot of unknowns at this time.
And so after we finish negotiations and finish the paratransit services contract and understand our health insurance costs, on negotiations and the paratransit services, we'll have an idea for the next 3 years of what those expenses will be. Health insurance is going to go up year after year, but this year seems to be a little more painful than most. So even if we take the steps to try to solve the structural issues with the budget, we need to understand what those costs are going to be before we could even make a recommendation of what we needed to do. So I think those two items are going to need to resolve.
You get the paratransit costs in the next few weeks?
Yeah, we're going to bring this before the board next week.
Next week,
Yes.
we will know a better paratransit cost.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then remind me, contract labor negotiations is multiple years at a time, or?
It'll be 3 years.
3 years at a time.
Mhm.
And that finishes,
We don't know. We know we'll kick off on May the 20th. We don't know when it will conclude.
And our paratransit expenses include the paratransit cost for the contractor, but it also includes paratransit fuel. It includes our assessments, when we just awarded a new contract for the assessments back in January or February. And then we've built in, because we own a lot of the vehicles now, we put some money in there for vehicle repairs. So that's not all contractor expense.
so our options as a finance committee are to move forward with the numbers you have today, or to reduce or amend, which is what Dr. Capo is alluding to. We can also reduce later in the year, once we know the wages and paratransit cost.
And that's what Fred and I are recommending, is to reduce later in the year when we find out real numbers for the assumptions.
With all due respect, but I will not vote on this. At least we have to show a balanced budget. If expenditure is exceeding revenue, I don't know. It's just, I don't feel comfortable with it.
What assumptions did you make on the fuel and oil?
Fuel, we went with $4.25 for diesel. And for CNG, $2.
It's like a 50% increase over 24 projected.
The projected, our diesel's been coming in a lot less. It's been coming in about $2.83, but we stuck with the $4.25 that we budgeted last year.
Is there any kind of data source that you can look at that's predicting what's going to happen with that?
It's very unknown in a political election year, president election year. It's unknown. Everything that we've looked at is probably going to be, I would say it's probably not going to go over 350, but in worst case scenario. Every 25 cents is 67,000. So if we reduced it every 25 cents.
Well, I'm glad you're projecting worst case scenario. Like you said, we have a presidential election happening. We have the war in Israel. With Iran getting involved, we don't know the extent of what it's going to lead to. We still have the war in Ukraine moving along. Taiwan is not gone completely out of the picture. Anything can happen in fiscal year 25. So I think that this is the time for us to grab the wood by the horn and come up with a balanced budget. Mr. Chairman, I highly recommend it.
I'm not in disagreement. The question is, where does it come from? So there's really there's probably not much flexibility in the revenue side, is there?
No.
So it has to be in the operating.
When I look at the federal side, sorry for cutting you, Mr. Chairman. When I look at federal side, 2023, we have 18 million budgeted. As always, they have done a phenomenal job. They're projecting 17 million. So a jump of almost over 2 million. And it's also something that we can look at, because when we look at the expenditure versus revenue, the delta is not that bad. Even per expenses, this is the time for us to take a hard look at it. What can we trim down from that to make it affordable? Professional services, it's also, the increase is significant there. What can we look at? Anything else, I think they've done a good job. Liability insurance and all those things, there's not much we can do there. But those top 2, 3, 4 items, we can look at those and see what we can truly control and bring it down to a balanced budget.
The professional services portion of that is our TransDev contract, and the largest portion of that is for our contract maintenance for our vehicles. And as everyone noticed, if you had to get any, at least car repairs, it's costing more and more to repair anything. So we do have some increased costs in contract maintenance. And materials and supplies also, because that's about $1 million of that, 1.1 million of that is for bus parts.
Let me add this as well. Trent said, this is the time for us also, Mr. Chairman, to look at that. It may have served us well in the past. Do we still need a layer between the board and the director, the general manager? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves. We have the fiduciary duty for this great organization in our community. Do we need a layer? Can this board work closely with the general manager and get things done? That's right there. We have low hanging fruit that we may not take care of this year, but we may take care of another time. It's just a question on the table.
Yeah. The biggest reason why we had it before was in the event of turnover. So it would be easy to have an interim person put in place, and for both the general manager and the assistant general manager. And we had both of those in the last year. So it was pretty helpful that we had that contract. Otherwise, the board would have been tasked with finding new general manager and assistant general manager. And our thoughts in past years was that we don't have the network to draw from that something like TransDev would have. And then other expertise that they provide, and Nikki and Fred will have to comment on that if we get true value from that. I suspect that we do, and it's nice to have the expertise that covers the wide breadth of transit authorities that Lextran covers to be able to benchmark ourselves against where we need to be. So I'd be reluctant to do something with a TransDev contract, but I'm not so afraid of trying to do something on the wage side and the fuel side and the paratransit side. And
Ms. Rogers?
have you negotiated the paratransit deal yet?
That's what we'll get in 2 weeks.
We have 2 weeks, we'll
Yeah.
bring
Alright,
a,
so you will have, you're gonna make a recommendation on who to select in 2 weeks.
Correct.
So if we vote on that, then you get to the negotiation after that?
Yes.
yes.
So that's where we need to be. Fuel a little bit too. It just seems like a lot. Everything's unknown.
Yep.
I can lower fuel. Like I said, every quarter is 67,000,
Yeah.
and it's at 425. So
And remind me, we have to have a budget passed by May 1st.
yes, because
Yes.
we have to go. Has to be passed before we go to city council, and it has to go to the state.
And you have to go to city council on May 14th. You can't move that.
There's a little wiggle room, but in terms of weeks, not in terms of months.
Just because we have several contracts
Yep.
in the next few weeks.
And I wouldn't expect the negotiations to be resolved in May.
Mm-mm.
That could go for a while,
It could
right?
go for a while, yes.
Yeah.
When's the contract expire?
June 30.
Okay, but it's gone past that before.
Yes.
Yes, last time we came to an agreement in October. So everything just continues as it is until we get an agreement.
Our other option as finance committee is to adjourn today, ask them to come back with another budget and meet before our next board meeting.
Well,
We have the work session on Wednesday.
work session on Wednesday.
With the whole board,
Yeah.
so that could be the alternative number 2. I don't feel comfortable today, like cutting everything by 10% without details of their recommendations.
It's, I mean, that big of a cut's probably going to be a service cut.
Biting my tongue. I had these same conversations with Carrie all the time, and there is a solution different than keeping everything the way it is and cutting service.
Okay.
So what that solution is, I don't know, but you look at where the big numbers are, and that's where it has to happen. And look at what we budgeted and what actually happened last time when, you know, fuel was unknown last year too. So what did we budget?
425.
And, you know, so it came in a lot less. And so there's flexibility in there. And, you know, we used to complain the other way around on a balanced budget, is that we were pumping up the operating expenses. Remember? And then that never happened. And so now it's the other way around, but yeah, I can see property taxes increasing, maybe not this year, but in the future years by more than 3, just because there's gonna be more development. And, you know, they continue to reassess. But there's not a lot of flexibility on the revenue side. We're not gonna ask for more tax money. I'm not.
So I think
Well,
our,
Mr. Chairman, if you look, higher ed does not always face changes, but throughout the country, even major universities are cutting. So I'm not saying we cut, but let's just please take a hard look at it. I guarantee you, making a tough decision today will save us in 2, 3, 4 years from today. Mr. Combs, I want you to be successful.
Thank you.
Nothing against you. And, you know, we have one of the best CFOs I can tell you. This is the time for us just to look at the numbers and make sure we're doing it today while preserving the future.
if we're not making any amendments today, we could propose at our workshop, we look at budget A and budget B.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard, Fred and Nikki. Everybody else has to do it. Except the federal government and that thing.
Madam CFO, I have full faith in you. You're the greatest. Just go back and take a look at it. It's doable. It might be painful, but I know it can be done. Very proud of your institutional knowledge and everything you've done so far. So let's just look at it one more time and see what we can come up with.
Okay.
What can we do on the paratransit side?
I mean, the
Is
biggest,
it typical that the agency pays for the fuel?
that I don't know.
We can get a better price than they can.
Yeah.
But can they reimburse us for it?
It would just be built in the contract where we would pay for it
They
anyway.
don't have any revenue.
It would, yeah, it would be built in the contract.
Okay. Look at the capital plan.
Capital plan, I left 2024 on here so we could, because we have some projects that are still ongoing right now, such as Canopy, the CAD AVL system, some of our IT projects. We had, and the, as well as the transit center. We have an increase in, it went from 6.3 million to 6.8 million for our 5307 funding. Our 5339 funding, which is formula funding for, usually for one bus, went from 553 to 604. So that's actually a partial bus now because a bus is a lot more than that now. So we usually combine that with another grant to be able to purchase that. We have the 5310 that you see on the bottom. The 5310, that's the 240,000 that we're getting from the state to buy paratransit vehicles. That's the one you all approved at the last board meeting for us to enter that contract with them. Our state funding, as you can see on here, it's 1.8. On the operating budgets, it's a little less because it matches 5307, but it also matches 5339. And there's a little bit of match in there for the 5310 enhanced mobility. Our other projects, the carbon reduction program and the congestion mitigation and air quality improvement are left, are some that Fred had mentioned that we have, when you order buses, you know that the bus usually doesn't get here for 22 to 24 months. So we've put that in fiscal year 2025. And so we have a local share for the FY 2025 budget will be just a little under $1 million.
And so I know we've talked about this in the past, for our formula funds, the census just happened. Is that for last year?
Yes, that's how we went up.
These increases.
That's where the increase came from. It's 450,000.
Comparatively, did other transit go up higher than us?
It all depends on size. It depends on miles, hours, and size of the city.
Because it's based on our population, is that, and just the fact that Lexington's not growing as fast as some of our other mid-size and large cities, I was just curious, but we went up instead of down, so that's a positive. And then the state matches, when 5307 goes up, they match going up.
They give, they do a 20% match.
Has that been long-standing? Would that ever change?
We just started that when toll credits disappeared.
Okay.
So 2022 was our first year to have state funding to match our 5307 grants. Before it was toll credits and with just usually about $400,000 in state money. But since toll credits went away, they have given us set aside money to match our 5307. Hopefully that will continue the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's an unknown also.
That's on that, because this is forecasted past this current administration, and so it's a new DOT secretary's policies. So that may change.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
That's why it doesn't show any state match in 26, 27, 28, because we will be matching any grants that we apply for and receive in future years. But right now, if based on the 5307 and the 5339, the state would match those.
So where are you not seeing the state? Because I see the state funding through 2028.
No, the local match, very
The
last
local
line.
match.
The local match is not showing for 26, 27, 28, and that is if we receive state matching.
Got it.
We can use
So the local match is half-ish of the state?
the local match. The local match on this year is matching, it matches CMAQ funds, it matches LONO funds, it matches a lot of those. We have to match that carbon reduction program, so. We can use a portion of our capital money toward that's where our revenue comes in on the operating budget. So we've put as much as we can in future years for paratransit out of our capital money. So if we had some project come up, we might have to, lower those in future years, but right now that's what we're looking at. Any questions?
I don't have a question more, and you already mentioned this, Fred. Part of our long-term conversation of how we make our expenses and our revenue match, I think, plays into our strategic planning as a board and what we do going forward. And so that's this funding you see that we budgeted last year, right? And that would carry over for next year. That's
Yes, it should be on
Correct.
here as
the planning, research, and development.
And that 75 there would be the microtransit study. So the 350, we've got about 300 of that left.
Yes, correct.
That would carry forward for the strategic plan, yes.
And that's what we used for the cost analysis for taking paratransit in-house.
Yes.
We did use that funding there.
Any questions?
So, local match in the out years. Local, that's dependent on,
What we apply for.
okay,
Most grants that we apply, anything competitive is usually an 80-20 match.
okay.
So we have to provide 20% of any of that, which bus and bus facilities, LONO, CMAQ, any of those.
So what would we be applying for in the out years?
I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, bus and bus facilities, every year that comes available. That includes low and no emissions. Should CMAQ become available, we would apply for that. That traditionally had been every year, but there's been a few years there where it hadn't been available. And then anything that sort of pops up in between that, we don't, I mean, like the EPA funds sort of just kind of appeared, and we went after those. There was no match involved in those, but carbon reduction was another one that just sort of came out of the blue. We were able to engage in that. But bus facilities, low-no, CMAC are the.
I probably should have asked, but we should probably do that fleet comparison again, so everybody can see that.
Just
How new our buses are, or how old our buses are, and what's in service and what's not.
We were just talking about that earlier today.
Yeah,
so.
we were.
And you could bring that back up in the workshop where it was like 30%. That's what you're thinking? Like, we broke up, it was CNG, electric, how old?
Well, that, yeah,
Mhm.
but that one that we always saw where we had a big chunk of old buses, and then like we had hardly anything. Then we had 1 year where we bought a lot of stuff, and then we've had some more years recently where we bought more. But just to get a feel for what the inventory and lifespan is of what we've got, because that will play into the future of what we need to be budgeting and what grants we need to be trying to obtain.
Any more questions on the capital plan?
No questions for me. And remind me, because we haven't had the budget workshop in the last year, 2 years. What will be the difference in the Wednesday meeting?
We had it last year.
No, maybe I just didn't attend because I already heard it. It's the same thing, but for other members.
Yes.
Not this year,
Mhm.
based on what we talked about.
And in that workshop, we can't take any votes.
Correct.
And this one, technically, we can't take any votes, we just can recommend, but at the board meeting, we can take votes.
Yes.
The last thing for me, unless there's old business, is there any old business? Nikki sent out a guesstimate of long-term cash flows. So, did you see that, Dr. Acapo, the long-term cash flows?
I only sent it to you.
Oh, she only sent it to me, never mind.
I can send it to them.
Yeah, send it to Jamie and Dr. Acapo, and it just gives a feel for what the future years would look like if we don't make any changes. And I won't say anything else about it. It's not like it wasn't part of the packet or anything, so we really shouldn't be talking about it. But it's something to make yourselves familiar with.
That's all I have it.
Yep. And with that, I guess we can adjourn unless somebody else wants to say anything. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Acapo. And Jamie.
Yeah.